بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is now for Islamic Bioethics in the age of genetics. I want to start by saying that genetics is a very broad field, so it's very, very difficult to cover everything in it, just impossible. We will just give an overall description of what happened, what did this new field of genetics, what kind of changes did it make, which will have impacts on the bioethical deliberations, including, of course, Islamic bioethics. And then we take the applied example of gene editing, one of the most recent applications in the field of genetics. So we start by first this one. In order to understand what genetics did and what kind of change, what kind of shift it made, I usually give this metaphor to the students. Imagine that our bodies, which we use to approach as organs, consisting of organs and tissues, things that we can see and perceive, as a printed version of a document, Word document, which has been printed. So let's say this is the body we used to know and that we have. This printed version of the Word document, sometimes you have mistakes in it. So for instance, instead of I say, I go to school, I will say, I go zoo school. So the T is wrong, you need to take it out and you put Z instead. If you do this on the printed version, it doesn't matter how good you did it. Whenever you print the document again, it will be, I will go zoo school. You will have the same mistake because you corrected it on the printed, but the original version is not the one you have, it's something, the digital version. So now we use to work, again, is this understanding, to work with the printed version, with the body that we have here, the hand, things that we used to have. And when we look into the classical medicine, we see الأعضاء الرئيسة والأعضاء الأربعة الرئيسة والخمسة والستة, the main organs and the sub-organs, etc. This is the description that we used to have when we do the anatomy and all this stuff. Genetics came to tell us, take care, there is a digital version. The digital version in the computer is the real one. And if you want to correct anything and you did it in the digital version, whenever you print, you don't have to correct it by yourself again anymore. So now this is what we have. This is the body as we see it. Is a body consisting of letters next to each other. These are, of course, metaphors that geneticists used. That there are 4 letters for chemical substances repeated all the time, A, T, C, G. 4 letters composing the alphabet of the human body. The whole our body is ATCGs. These ATCGs should be ordered in a specific way, like I go to school. If there is the Z instead of T, it means there is a problem. This problem can cause diseases. Some of these letters compose what we now call gene. All the letters by together, this is the genome, not the gene, the genome or the DNA, the full DNA. With the Human Genome Project, in 1953, Francis Crick and Thomas, what's his name? James Watson. James Watson and Francis Crick, James Watson from the US, is not in California, James Watson, okay. James Watson and Francis Crick from the UK, they discovered the structure of the DNA. That's why they got the Nobel Prize, and James Watson became such a prominent figure in the world, next to some controversial statements he made. But anyhow, they discovered this. By the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 20th century, we will have the full reading of the whole genome. The Human Genome Project, led by the US, where different countries also participated, they sequenced the whole human genome. By sequencing the whole human genome, we started to have a new revolution. Now we can read this book. We have access, full access, to the digital version of the printed document that we use to deal with. This digital version gives us access to information that humans never had before. As Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project after James Watson resigned, he wrote a book called Language of God. And to him, DNA is the language of God, through which he communicated. God communicated his message to us, how he created us. So we started to have access to this full book of the full genome, and it is a huge one. When the Human Genome Project was finished and completed in 2001, and the full version later in 2003, we had access to the full book, all the ACTGs, the 3 billion letters, but we don't know what every sentence means. We didn't know this at this time, about 20 years ago. Every year, almost every week, almost every day, we start decoding and deciphering the language by time, what all these letters means. And things are improving all the time. To see that this combination of letters means something good or means something bad, etc. This combination of letters, the 3 billion letters, I'm just trying to see the statistics here. 3 billion letters. If we put a book with these 3 billion letters, a physical book, and you want to read them, to read the book, it will take 31 years. If you read 1 letter per second, even if you continue with reading day and night, reading without understanding anything, it will take you 31 years. If we printed the book on A4s, it will be as high as the Washington Monument, about 555 feet. So you can imagine how big it is, even if we see it as a normal book. Add to this that these letters are not normal letters. In order to decipher them and to understand them, especially their combinations, etc., is much, much, much more difficult than the usual book. But now we have access to this. Having access to this information means power. So we can modify things, we can change things, at least we can understand things. Many of the diseases which we did not understand why they happen, how they happen, how we can resist them or prevent them, now we have access to this. But by time we started, although we didn't finish reading the book and understanding it, now we can edit this book. We can interfere with our hands and say that I go zoo school, I make it to school myself. This is with, especially, there were some tools before, but now with the CRISPR-Cas9, made here in California again, was Downda, I think, Downdra, the professor, and together with another colleague of her, they created the chemical scissor. This is like a scissor in which you cut the stuff. We can also now cut and paste in the DNA. So we have access. We started by having access to the digital version. By time, in the beginning, we couldn't read everything. Every day, our reading skills are improving in order to know what these letters all mean. Now we are moving ahead to editing the book itself, to add in it what we want, to delete what we want, to modify what we want, etc. There are different techniques now. So there are techniques that, for instance, the ATCGs, if we have a different order, we can take the C out and then we put the G. Now there is a professor in Harvard who could change it in itself. So instead of taking out, copying and pasting, you will modify the letter itself. He could change, I think, 2 of the 4, and he's working on the other 2 now. So even more advanced than the CRISPR-Cas technology. Of course, these new information and these new technologies have created open-ended possibilities. We can change so many things. The information written in this book or registered in this book are not only about the health condition. So they are not only about how do we get sick and why, etc. It's much, much more than this. For instance, it tells us information about our ancestry, not just the father and the mother, but the very, very distant forefathers for thousands of years. This can create troubles, can solve some problems for people who want to know their ancestry, but can also create troubles. I think you have been following the problem between President Trump and some of the people claiming that they are not Americans, and one of them did the DNA to prove that she is American and her ancestry was born here and stuff like this. So you see genetics getting into politics very clearly. There have been countries in the Middle East that want to introduce the DNA testing for the whole population, for everyone coming to the country, and to determine nationality on the basis of the results of the DNA testing, because we have DNA ancestry, DNA paternity, and all this stuff. So it can tell us about the past, but it can also tell us about the future. We have now some gene mutations, and the mutation here is I go zoo school. So when you have the Z instead of the T, so it should be ATCG, now it's CGTA, for instance. This is a mutation. It shouldn't be like this. So there is a mutation. This mutation tells us that something wrong can happen, sometimes or many times. There is, for instance, the gene mutation BRCA1 and BRCA2. If we see specific mutation in women in particular, then we know that they are more susceptible to getting breast cancer than any others. These women still do not have cancer, but we know that they may get it. So what to do? First of all, should we tell them? And if we tell them, what kind of procedure? There is the famous Hollywood actress, Angelina Jolie. She had this. And she did the test because I think her mother and her sister, some of her family members, died with breast cancer. And she had BRCA1 or BRCA2, and she amputated, she cut her breasts as a preventive procedure, etc. Although, by the way, cutting the breasts doesn't give you 100% guarantee that you will get it, but it lowers the chance, etc. So it tells you about the future. You are a healthy person, but maybe you will get sick. Not only you, but your children, your grandchildren. What will happen to you when you are 40 or 50 years old? Genetics can always tell us about this. So for instance, there is a gene mutation. If we have it in the person, then we know that this person will get what we call Huntington disease, a very difficult disease. that the person gets when he is 40 or 50 years old, will spend about 5 to 10 years, a very difficult life, and by the end the person dies. More than 90%, if the mutation is there, that the person will get the disease. Almost deterministic. No treatment for the disease. So we just know that this person will not go beyond 40 or 50, and the last 5 or 10 years will be very difficult years for the person. Other genetic diseases are not that deterministic, that the gene will determine, or the gene mutation will determine what happened, but they must have other combinations. Like we can have a gene mutation that the person will be more susceptible to diabetes or to lung cancer or stuff like this, but there must be other environmental factor that contributes to this. So we will have, for instance, two brothers, both of them have the gene mutation, but one of them will get the disease because he was a heavy smoker, for instance. But the other one was a healthy person, an athlete, eating healthy, doing exercises, etc. But the point is that we have wealth of information, not only about our health condition, not only about now, but about the past, about the future, etc. And we have a big discussion now in bioethics about ethical management of this knowledge. How can we manage this information in an ethical way? For instance, how to keep the privacy of the people. If your DNA is recorded in a specific file, and these files have been hacked, people will know everything about you. They can even synthesize your DNA. So they can put you in trouble by synthesizing your DNA, creating it, and putting it in a crime scene. If the police came and checked, you will be here. They will discover that you have been here. So they will know that X or Y or Z was in the crime scene. So he was, for instance, the killer. He was the murderer. People can do that once they have it. There are now some technologies. If you have the DNA, you can put it in specific programs, and it will draw your face from the DNA. There are different levels of certainty and accuracy about this. But once you have the DNA, you have been exposed completely. So how to keep our privacy in this modern time and in the age of genetics is a big question. Who should have access to information in our DNA? If we have this information, even the person himself or herself, should we tell all the information that we get? Some people who come because they have a child with a rare genetic disease, and we don't know where the gene mutation exactly. So we will need to collect the samples from the family, from the father, the mother, the brothers, the sisters, sometimes even the uncles and aunts, to see where it exactly went wrong. Once we are turning over the pages of the book of the DNA, looking for the piece of information that we are looking after, we will come across the other chapters that we were not looking for, but we will read them. Like, for instance, we discover that this child is not related to the husband. The person, they came to the hospital or to the research institute not because they know if he is a father or not. You do this in the court, but not here. Should I tell this information? Or I discover that the person, for instance, have the gene mutation of Huntington disease, that he will die after 40 or 50 years. Should I give this information to the person, although he was not looking for this information? This is what we call incidental findings. Some people would say, yes, you have to give it because it belongs to the person. But some would say, some people, once we give this information, they will start thinking about suicide. Although they may die because of reasons not related to Huntington disease. They may die because they had an accident with a car accident, because they were in a surgery and the surgery didn't succeed. Why would we tell the people? So we get new questions with new complexities and difficulties because of these information. And then we will get the greatest difficulty, not what to do with the information, to tell the people or not to tell the people, and what and to whom, etc. But by the way, before going to the other difficulty, if we tell this information to the person himself or herself, it doesn't concern only the person, but the family. So the BRAC 1 and BRAC 2 of Angelina Jolie, for instance, when she reveals this information, she's by default revealing the information of the family, because the others may have the same information. Maybe I, as her sister, for instance, I didn't want that the people will know that I am susceptible to breast cancer, but now it is. So once I give information to you, it's not only about you, but about other family members. But this is one type of challenges. Nowadays, with the possibility of editing the book, getting into the letters inside, and changing the letters that we think they are not good, because they are gene-causing diseases or disease-causing genes or something like this, and we can change them. How far we can go with this? By editing that. The problem here is that we don't have the full scale of information that we are looking for. If I have an injury and I go to add a cut in my hand, I go to do surgery in order to stitch it in the hospital, we know the possible side effects, etc., to a great extent. What can happen to the body if you are allergic, if you are going to do anesthesia or something like this. They ask you if you are allergic, etc. We know the consequences more or less. But with getting into the book and changing stuff, we have very little compared with other types of medical intervention about what can happen because of this intervention. Going back to the issue of the digital and the print version, when you change the T to make it Z, a letter, you think that this will be everything. But if you change the Z and the 2 and then school and then a whole sentence, you see that the structure of the file gets changed. What's in this line will go to the other line, etc. So it may affect the whole file. This is what can happen also with gene editing. So I am editing this part, but then we have 3 billion letters. It's not only 2-3 letters. We have billions of letters. It may affect other letters that I never thought about that they are related. So I'm doing something, for instance, in the stomach, but it will affect something in the brain. This is in the same person. If I'm doing the editing in the in the what they call germline gene editing, so I am editing the sexual cells, like the sperms, like the eggs, it will affect not only the person but the whole generation coming after. So things may appear after 20 years, after 40 years, after 50, after 100 years. So how much information do we need before we go further with this? With these questions, and should we, in the first instance? The discussions in the Islamic discourse, again, interdisciplinary discussion. There are puzzles. You try to make sense of them by having biomedical scientists and religious scholars and the organizations that we talk about. The first discussions happened in 1993 when it comes to genetics. Why 1993? Because the Human Genome Project started in 1990. And as part, and this was a big thing in the whole world, as part of these discussions, biomedical scientists in the Muslim world told the religious scholars, now there is a very big project called the Human Genome Project. Shouldn't we discuss what should Islam say about this? So they started the discussions. The first conference I found was a conference held in Qatar in 1993. Till 2013 was an important milestone. In 2013, the organization based in Jeddah issued a conclusion, a resolution, a fatwa, in favor of genomics and research in the field of genomics, and said that this is a collective duty, فرض كفاية, alhamdulillah, a collective duty, فرض كفاية, that Muslim countries should be involved in this type of research, as long as this research is in compliance with Sharia, etc., and they gave some conditions. So from 2013, we moved beyond the question, is it good or bad, to join the genetic and the genomic revolution. The question became, how should we do that? So in 2013, so the fatwa was issued in 2013, December 2013, both Qatar and Saudi Arabia launched their national genome project, maybe the same month and the same year, maybe in the same day even, to show the competition. Later on, a couple of years later, this was 2013, a couple of years later, other rich oil countries in the Gulf region joined, like Bahrain, and I think also United Arab Emirates joined like a year or two ago by having their own national genome project. So from 2013, the discussions were about the applications, not anymore about is it good or bad, should we join that or not. This is the publication of the proceedings of the very first conference that I could have access to, Ethical Implications of Modern Research in Genetics, held by the College of Science and Arts at this time, College of Science at this time at Qatar University in 1993. And it was also this collective ijtihad by bringing together biomedical scientists and religious scholars, etc. The proceedings have been published in both English and in Arabic. And later we had different conferences by, among others, the organization in Kuwait. This is one about the International Symposium on Genetics, Human Reproduction, and Human Genome and Gene Therapy, an Islamic Perspective. This was 1998. This is one of the most influential conferences that have been held on issues related to genetics and genomics. This is the conference that has been used and referred to in all the subsequent discussions afterwards. So most of the discussions afterwards are just commenting, expanding, criticizing, responding to the proceedings of this conference held in 1998. In 2006, the same institution held another organization, more or less with the same topic, but they involved the other religions. And not just Christianity and Judaism, but they also involved secular bioethics. Someone asked me if they get into dialogue with the others. This is one of the examples in which they try to have more or less a consensus view about the issues related to genetics and genomics. Now we go to the editing, the human genome editing, and I will base myself on the publications I've just referred to. I try to sum up what they thought about this. When it comes to human genome editing, there are two issues that are like the guiding principles in the discussions. The first one is the dignity of God's creatures. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all creatures. The fact that He created them, it gave them inherent dignity directly. So plants have dignity, animals have dignity, humans have dignity, etc. But human dignity, dignity of humans, has a particular situation. There are now some environmentalists, especially including people coming from Muslim background, would question this issue that humans have a special status in the universe, etc., or not. But the people participating in these conferences are still holding to this, and I would say this is still the mainstream position in the Islamic tradition till now. Dignity of humans is much higher than the dignity of any other creatures of God. So, if you are editing any creature, you have to take care of the dignity that you may be altering God's creation in a way which is not permissible, تغيير خلق الله. But if you are dealing with humans, you must be much more aware of the consequences. Because of this respect to human dignity, issues of safety, efficacy, informed consent, etc., must be regulated. These are general guiding general principles when it comes to human genome editing. But further than this, so if we pass this, so we take care of the dignity. If we are editing, like now, there is a project in some labs, one in Imperial College, one here, by the way, South Carolina, in South California, working on editing the genes of the mosquitoes which transfer malaria. So they are working on editing their, doing gene editing so that these mosquitoes will not transfer malaria anymore. So even if you are working with mosquitoes, you have to keep in mind from an Islamic perspective that these are creatures of God, and when you make these changes, you have to be aware of the consequences. If you are doing this with humans, the precautions must be much more strict. Further than this, there are two big questions that must be answered. On the basis of the answer, it will, to a large extent, determine the ethical position towards this type of new intervention. The first is, what are we editing in the human body? What kind of cells? Are these somatic cells? Are these germline cells? For those who do not come from a biomedical background, a somatic cell is a specialized cell. Like, for instance, skin cells. These are somatic cells. Like the hair cells, the heart cells, the kidney cells. They are specialized, they make cells of a specific organ. But germline cells are the cells which we transfer to our future generations, to our children. So the sperm cells, the egg cells that go to the process of fertilization and then create children, if we edit these cells will go in the way we edited them to the future generations. So what are we editing? If we are editing somatic cells, then I'm editing one human body only. If I'm editing germline cells, I'm editing this human body and his future offspring. Not only one person, but it goes to the others. If we are editing somatic cells, then it's much less controversial than the germline cells. Why? Because many of these religious scholars think that the genes, the cells, the tissues are more or less like the organs. So if we can make surgeries and things with the organs, why not with the somatic cells, the genes in the somatic cells? We are here working in the body and we are here working in the body. So there is an analogy, qiyas, it shouldn't be a big deal. The second thing is that the impact of what we are doing is limited. It's on one person. We are not affecting other future generations. But if we are doing this with germline cells, then it's much more controversial. Why much more controversial? Because from an Islamic perspective, we are not the owners of our body. We are trustees. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner with an uppercase O, but we are trustees. He entrusted us to take care of the body. In our capacity as trustees, we can have a say about our body. Like I can prevent any physician from interfering in my body, etc., because I have the authority on this body. But what about the body of the still non-existing humans? So if I'm changing now in the germline cells of mine, I am deciding about the structure of the body of my children, grandchildren, grandchildren, etc. The problem here with germline editing, it's almost unimaginable for the time being that it can be re-wheeled. Why? Because we have like the 8-cell division, which create the embryo, but these 8 cells will get into about, I think, 37 billion cells that we have in our bodies. These basic core cells will make all the other cells. Once the disperse, you cannot control. You are not going to fix every cell of the 37 billion cells in the born babies. So once you edit the germline, it means it goes to the next generations. You cannot reveal it, at least for the time being. So do you have an authority to do that? To decide for generations to come about what should happen or not? Some of the opinions in these discussions spoke about the possibility of disturbing lines of lineage, nasab. How? If you remember when we spoke about the IVF, that all components, the egg, the sperm, the uterus, all must come from people who are married. So now imagine we will do the gene editing as following. We will take a number of the ACTGs out because they are defect, mutated. And then we will put in them the good ones, coming from, not from the person, not from the husband, not from the wife, from someone else. And we put it in the germline cell. This means that the genetic makeup of the coming person, part of it will be coming from someone else, from outside marriage. In one of the meetings, when I was explaining this, geneticists there said this is not possible, and this is misperception. Because these are chemicals, and these chemicals you can just make them in the lab. You don't bring them from somewhere else, so it's not that coming from one person to another. So this last argument can be problematic, according to the geneticists maybe, but this is what's written in the works of these publications that I mentioned. So what we are doing, if it is somatic cell, scholars are much more open to discuss than germline. The other question is why? Why are we doing that? What is the purpose of doing that? This is what we call telos of medicine. In Arabic we can say maqasid al-tib. Teleology is the ilm of maqasid. What is the purpose of medicine? Throughout history, not only in Islam, medicine has been commissioned with two main tasks. Keeping the body healthy and fixing it if it gets sick. That's it. حفظ صحة وبرء سقم, as Avicenna said. We maintain the healthy condition of the body, and if it went wrong, then we fix it. This is what the medicine does. I go to the hospital for this, to know how to keep myself healthy, or when I sick, I get treated. So, is it treatment? Is it because of gene mutations? We are editing the genes because some of them are mutated. Religious scholars would say treatment is morally permissible, can be recommended, can sometimes be obligatory if it is life-saving. So, in principle, it's fine. Even if we see it as changing the creation of God, but not every alteration of God's creation, not every change in alteration in God's creation is unethical or immoral. This is part of the divine scheme of a creation. So it's a type of treatment, a new type of treatment. Not dealing with the printed version, but dealing with the digital version. Does it matter that we are here dealing with the printed or the digital? They would say, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make morally significant difference. Some of them said, because of the issue of human dignity, we use gene editing for treatment purposes only, of all other means will not work. Traditional means will not work, then we move to it. Why would you do that? Because when it comes to efficacy, when it comes to efficiency, when it comes to safety, other tools have been used much more. We have much more experience in them. We know the consequences here is much more risky than the others. Only because of this, we say we use them only as a matter of exception. But if they are the only option available, then we use them. So this is the first possibility for answering why. Treatment. People are sick, and we can treat them through this type of technology. The other possible answer is not treatment, but enhancement. Sometimes the borderline between treatment and enhancement is very difficult. But let's take the normal division and typology. Treatment, my body is not functioning like the others. I cannot hear well, I cannot see well, I cannot walk well, I cannot digest then I do gene editing to function normally again, treatment. But for enhancement, I am okay. I'm not sick. But I want to be much faster than what I am now. Okay? So I can run, but not fast enough. I want to be the fastest. I want to do the 100 meters in 2 seconds, whatever. So we will do the gene editing, not because you are sick, but because you are not satisfied with the normal condition that the average people have already. But you want to be better. I want to do the gene editing so that I can memorize much faster and much more than what I can. If I'm a lawyer, for instance, and I want to read the law books and the constitutions, etc., and to keep them in my head, this takes days, months, years, etc. Why, if we can do that in an overnight? Why not? To enhance cognitive enhancing drugs and stuff like this. This is much more controversial than treatment. Why? Here we can see two groups of scholars. Some of them say that there is no problem. What is the problem of creating better humans? What is wrong with this? If people can memorize much faster or much more than usual by doing that, what is haram herein? And we can use it for good stuff. Like, for instance, we help Muslim children to memorize the Quran without all the difficulties that parents always have with them to keep them learning the Quran for 3, 4, 5 years. What's the problem in that? Moral enhancement, that we can make the children much more polite without advising them all the time. What's wrong with that? And inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal, even I want to be beautiful and whatever, there is no problem. The others would say, absolutely not. This shouldn't be the case, and we have to accept how God created us. To my mind, by reading between the lines, it seems that both groups have two different understandings about human nature. One of them thinks that we have been created by God in the best possible way. So we have been created as the best. Whenever we try to interfere in how God created us, we will only make it worse. Maybe we think we will be better because we don't have the cognitive capacities to measure after 100 years what will happen, but for sure it is wrong. The others think God created us with the potential of being the best. We can always get better. And part of this potential is to use our hands to make it better and better. So the best here is the potential inherent in our nature, not how we are created as we are. And they say we have seen humans advancing and developing through education, through experiencing, through testing, etc. We are much better and much more advanced than our ancestors before. Look what we have done with the electricity, with the machines, with the computers, with all this. This is changing God's creation. We changed the whole universe, how we can travel, how fast we can move from one place to another, etc. And it was good. We enjoy the fruits of this, and there is no problem. So there is a great potential in our nature, and it is for us to discover and to decide what to do with. So can we change? Yes, we can change, but in a responsible way. In a responsible way. This is the question. Some of those who created some reservations, they said, it seems with editing the genes, sometimes we edit some of the functions of the soul itself, not just the body. So this again goes beyond the work and the mission of medicine. Like for instance, being more truthful or less lying. This is usually not the work of the body. This is the work of improving the soul. So should physicians be busy with working and editing the soul now in this regard, or is it actually a physical thing, and we just think that it is a soul? So we get into, with enhancement, we get into really difficult questions. So is gene editing possible in Islam or not? According to these religious scholars, there is no one clear answer, and it always depends. So if it is, for instance, the question of what is about somatic cells, and the question of why is treatment, and let's say it's life-threatening disease, there is no alternative, etc., you would find the majority saying it's possible. No problem. It's like any other treatment, but this is just a new form of treatment. But it takes the same way of reasoning about it and coming to conclusions. Beyond that, these things will get a bit more controversial. So if it is germline cell, even for treatment, you would find more religious scholars who would be more hesitant about this. Why? Because of the long-term impact that we cannot control. We don't have enough information to do, is this good for the coming generations or not? We have an issue about the authority. Can we decide for all these generations to come? If it is germline cell and it is for enhancement, it will be almost dark, very difficult to tolerate. Personally, I think, because fiqh is a very pragmatic science and discipline, and most of the people who participate in these discussions are jurists, fuqaha, it depends on how science will develop. So if science develops successfully, and we have seen examples of great success of untreatable diseases that have been treated by gene editing, etc., you will see different approach to that. If we have failures in people, we have created giants or metamorphoses, people with metamorphoses, whatever, you will find also a different responses, not only from the people in Islamic bioethics, but ethicists and bioethicists in general. Like now, the thing they are working on in Africa about malaria and doing gene editing for the mosquitoes. If it happened and you can eradicate malaria, people will think gene editing for mosquitoes is a good thing. Why not? If it went wrong, and then you created mosquitoes that eat humans instead of transferring malaria, people, of course, will think differently and say, no, actually, humans shouldn't have gone into that far, and it was never good to do it from the beginning, etc. So it will always depend on how things will develop. Thank you so much. This is what I had for the time being, if you have any questions.
It just reminds me of something that happened in Australia some years ago. There was some kind of bug that was ruining the sugarcane in Queensland, in the northern part of Australia. So somebody had come up with the idea that there was a frog in South America called the cane toad, they called it, that would eat these insects. Bugs, so they imported these frogs. It turned out that the only insect that this frog did not eat was the one that they wanted to get rid of. Plus, the cane toad bred very quickly, and so they in fact infected all the waterways with their eggs. They grow very large, by the way. Some of them became pets and things, but they also have these poisonous glands all over them, and dogs and other animals that tried to eat them just died.
Okay.
And they just couldn't, they actually made it worse, as you, in relation to what you were saying earlier on. It created now these cane toads now have laid their eggs all across the top of Australia.
Mm.
I mean, it is now it was
A big problem.
A big problem.
Yes.
There was a very funny
Yes.
short film made about them where
Okay.
people would just drive along, see them in the streets, and just run over them to try to reduce them, but it
Yes.
hasn't worked.
Yes.
And they've killed the plants, they've killed the native
Okay.
flora and fauna. They eat. All sorts
And the
of
person who proposed the idea, what did he?
Dead.
He died.
He
Yes.
died.
Yes.
So now the generations.
If it worked, he would have been a hero. But yeah,
but it's very
didn't work.
it's kind of typical that
Yes.
it never ceases to amaze that what mistakes people can make
Yes. Yes.
thinking that
It's all about the issue that we cannot predict and anticipate what will happen. We don't have enough information. The question is, there is a big problem, and we want to address this problem. How much information should we have at hand before we go? This is the big question. Because even the mosquitoes, for instance, in Africa, when we had the discussions in Imperial College a couple of days ago, I spoke about the environmental balance. From an Islamic perspective, there is the concept of al-mizan. God created the environment, the whole universe, in balance. Everything is in balance. It has its own wisdom. Maybe we don't know it, but we know it exists. So if you try to take anything out, it can create imbalance. So I asked, for instance, these mosquitoes, what do they eat? What eats these mosquitoes? So if you change them, it will affect the other species. So it may create troubles. And we are speaking here about animals and insects. We are not speaking about humans yet. This lack of knowledge and the urge to solve the problem because we think we can, because we have the knowledge now that we didn't have before, sometimes creates problems. Yes.
It's like to stay with the malaria example, there is a disease, it's called sickle cells. So it's people that have a certain type of hemoglobin.
Yeah.
So it can create its own problem, but it's make them less prone to contract malaria.
Yes.
So if you tackle one disease, then
Yes, that's the problem. You have 3 billion letters. So if you try to change one, you don't know what will happen to the rest.
Let's attempt to work on genes and slice them or
Yeah.
whatever. Isn't it really against the will of God?
Which will of God? Because
Well, he created the species.
what Brother Chauki was speaking about, we have two types of the will of God: the universal will, al-kawniyya, and we cannot go beyond that, because if God doesn't want, it will never happen. But what we are talking about here is the legislative will, al-shar'iyya, what God wants us to do. Some people would say, once God gave us the knowledge, it means He's asking us to think about it. Otherwise, He wouldn't have made it accessible. Others would say He made it available in order to test us. Ibtila, to know how our going would deal with this new power. So we cannot say just in general, in the absolute, that it is against the will of God. Because nothing happens in the universe against the will of God, in the sense of the universal will. But of course, we do not pray against the will of God, against the legislature. He ordered us to pray, but not against His will in the kawni sense, in the universal sense of it. I don't know if Christianity knows this also differentiation. I don't know, but this differentiation is common among religions. Al-Ghazali spoke about it, so it's not something strange. Yes.
I was just going to say, let's say we go with the anthropocentric approach, and in terms of human beings having more dignity than other creations. What about genetically modified organisms that affect the health of human beings as well? And has that been looked into?
Yes. In these discussions, the religious scholars and also the scientists, by the way, are more inclined to say, as long as it's non-human creatures, you have much more flexibility. you can try what you want to try as long as there are some conditions. For instance, some of them would say if you want to do gene editing for corn, for instance, or for specific crops, then you have to keep the original ones because you don't know what will happen. So you shouldn't eradicate and completely replace the natural ones because you don't know what will happen. Maybe after 10, 20 years you can do it. This is usually how it works. But it's much more complex than this. There are so many ethical issues. Genetically modified food was introduced with the promise that there will be no hunger on earth. We will multiply the products of the land, etc. So our life will be much better than what we have. Africa will no hunger anymore. Okay. What we discovered later on is that these people, they are patenting the genetically modified foods, and there have been so many cases in the courts. Even the neighboring person, if things flied and went to the neighboring person, they will sue the person for seeding eggs. Then they have made plants that do not reproduce. So if you take them from your neighbor and try to put them in your land, it will not. You have to take specific plants from them, etc. So it became completely business. It has nothing to do with the hunger. It has no big objectives, etc. This is one. The second one, we started to have issues with the safety. So, for instance, they would make plants immune to the pests. Yeah. So they will kill the pests, for instance, so that they don't you don't lose a lot of product. So you will have much more at the end. Then we find after 2-3 times, the insects, they developed themselves, and they started to be much more aggressive than they were before, and they would eat much more than what was usual. So things are getting worse. Not to mention the environmental imbalance and all this stuff. That's why in Europe it has very bad name. GMF has very bad name, genetically modified food. And you have to label. If you have anything, you have to label so that the customers will make an informed choice to buy or not to buy. And if I'm not mistaken, it has almost no market in Europe. So genetically, the story of genetically modified food, I think it's a good story that shows us how important it is to be humble as humans. Not all what we think it is good, even if we have all this knowledge and capacities and techniques, etc., is not. And also things can be commercialized. So things which started as a very noble project to help the poor turned out to be patented ideas, etc., and the poor people cannot have access to. One of the key problems in the discussions that we have in Islamic bioethics is that this fiqhi approach, thinking about the puzzles, the halal and haram, etc., other dimensions are not that properly addressed, like the economic impact that we speak about here. Gene editing, for instance, and gene therapy, and stem cell research and all this stuff. Extremely expensive. The research done on this costs huge amounts of money. And if you want to do research, you must have enormous funding. There was recently, I commented on this on my Twitter when I read the news on Twitter about this. They developed, I don't know if it is gene therapy or gene editing, anyhow, coming from genetics, a rare disease and very stubborn one. You will get an injection to fix the gene mutation inside your body. So you don't need medicine anymore because the disease-causing gene has been fixed. So you get it once. It's $2 million. Can you imagine one pill, for instance, for $2 million? Who is able to offer this? So even if we passed all what we mentioned, There are issues of social justice and stuff like this which has been crossed over.
I heard also about gene modification of basmati rice in India.
Yeah.
In Monsanto here in the US patented it, and the peasants, the farmers in India, they were very poor. They could buy the seed, to plant
Yes.
the genetically modified ones.
Yes.
Many of them committed suicide.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And here next door in Mexico, forbade the genetically modified corn from the US to be exported to Mexico.
Mm, mm.
They
Yeah.
want their own corn because
Mm.
it's
Yes.
nature and
Yes.
taste whatever.
No, the financial and economic aspects are very important in these new and modern technologies. Yeah, it's
In Europe also, some areas where genetically modified crops are planted, they also objected to have them close to the farms that do organic type of
yes, yeah.
crop growing.
Yes, and this is about food and basic food, which you can say, okay, people need it. But there are also works, if I'm not mistaken, about issues which I wouldn't consider that important. Like, for instance, you will edit the flowers so that they continue fresh and giving the smell for a month, for instance, instead of a couple of days. What is, يعني, maybe it's me, I'm coming from a village, I don't think these things are important, but why are you going to spend so much money for editing the flowers and people cannot eat? Yeah, resource allocation.
Greed, human greed.
Yes, no, but the issue is the following. If you are editing this and creating these flowers which will give so many colors, so much smell and scent and stuff like this, you have the customers who will buy it. Yeah. Yes.
This idea of editing is, it sounds like a far away idea, but it's happening not already in plants and not yet in humans, but they use genetically modified cells that they inject in humans. So
The chimera and this stuff.
yeah,
Mm.
all cell therapy. So they genetically modify them so they can have therapeutic.
Yes. This is the trans-species intervention, for instance. And this is now happening at the level of research, not yet applied, but it's happening at the level of research. Maybe some of them are now in clinical trials, I don't know, but advanced, very advanced. We have shortage of organs. So we have much more waiting lists of the people who need organs like kidney or liver or whatever than the people who donate. One of the ways to do that is that we breed, is this a good one, or develop human organs in animals. In animals. So I think pancreas now, they were working on pancreas in the pig. What will they do? They will have the genome of the pig, and then they will cut the part which makes the pancreas, or the kidney, or the liver, whatever. And then they will put the piece of the gene or the genome which produces the liver cells or whatever in the embryo of the pig. So that we make sure that if the embryo survives, we'll have the kidney of a human, because we cut the part which creates the pancreas or the kidney. And we put this one. So if it develops, it will be a human one. Looks fine. And you can make so many organs then, whatever you like. And once you have them, you get it out from the pig, and you transplant it into humans with no problems of matching, etc., because you supervise the whole process. The problem here, some people said, how much you should put in the genome of the pig so that it will not pig anymore and it will be a human. When you ask the scientists, I spoke with my colleagues in Qatar, they said phenotypically, appearance, it's a pig. There is nothing wrong with it. It's only inside that. But if we can also add the kidney, we can also add the liver, we can add, so what will remain from the pig, what will be pig now and what will be human. So the differences between the species will be also a big problem in this regard. Yeah.
Can you explain maybe, or to the scientists now, this genetics field, explain the differentiation of cells when the embryo is formed? How from something that is formless and without any function specifically, become liver, lung,
Yes.
heart.
To the best of my knowledge, this has been a big secret throughout history. We don't know what happens exactly. For some reasons, some of them now related to how scientific research is regulated. You cannot work on embryos more than 5 days. With the age of embryonic research on human embryos, after 5 days must be terminated. So you cannot work beyond that. And what I understand from the scientists is that the aborted embryos, we don't have them before I don't know how many days, but anyhow there is a gap between the moment when we have to stop, 5 days, and the moment when we have miscarried embryos. So there is a dark part which we cannot study because of the regulations. But anyhow, it's a very complex one and we don't know. But now they try to know that through stem cell research. There is a Japanese professor who got Nobel Prize. He made a discovery, I think, in 2007. It was an established fact in medicine. Once these stem cells in the embryo get specialized, they cannot go back. So this was a part of an embryo when I was in the uterus of my mother. Now it's a skin cell. It will never be a stem cell anymore. This was understood, and if we think together, how come this would be an embryo? It cannot be. He said it can be. And he developed the technology that reverts the specialized cell into embryonic stem cell. What does he do? He will delete the memory of the cell, as if the cell will take a time machine, forget all what happens, and will remember only that very first part. So it will act and live like an embryo because it forgets everything else. And if you develop this cell, you can see how it works. So how the specialization happens. There is very good research in this at the moment. I attended some conferences where the scientists at the forefront talk about this, very interesting. They now try to make applications by taking these specialized cells, making them embryonic stem cells, and then trying to make them specialized cells again that can replace organs. Like now I think there are clinical trials in Japan for treating blindness. The people who are blind, you can change cells in the eye to make them function again through these stem cells that have been, they call it IPS technology, induced pluripotent stem cells, working on this at the moment. So this can reveal some information about how specialization happens, but very, very complex, I understand.
Does this relate to what Allah mentions in the Quran, personal specialization, and whenever the body is hurt?
Okay, this will be very modern interpretation. Most of the religious scholars would say mukhallaqa, that will become a human being, and now غير مخلقة, which have no destiny, that it will be, so it will be aborted. But there are other interpretations. Maybe this can be one of them. Huh?
Saudi woman who wrote about this.
Yeah.
She said the Islamic cells are like dormant whenever the body is affected, bone broken or skin cut or something. The cells regenerate themselves and
Can
heal
be.
the body, whatever.
Oh,
So these are غير مخلقات that be activated whenever the body has been affected by external factors. Or
can be. I cannot. My knowledge didn't go that far, but can be.
the tafsir people did not tackle this with doctors and
In the papers I read, no, they didn't speak about it because they are not interested in the tafsir or it's fiqh. So all what they care about, yes, all what they care about is the permissibility or impermissibility of the act at hand. Yeah. Yes.
Professor, you mentioned that gene editing is acceptable for the treatment. So my question is it to treat the disease that has no other way of treatment? Or it can
Yes,
be
I said those who
accepted?
accept are more inclined to say only for somatic cells and only for treatment. Some would add also if there is no alternative. So if we have a medical treatment which is available but not gene editing, then don't do gene editing. Why? Because it's less safe than the others. Not because it has a theological problem for them, just because it is less safe than the others.
Okay, and you mentioned the genes editing in a responsible way. Is it socially responsible or in terms of religion?
Of course, they speak about religion, but if it is irresponsible in a social way, this is also religious. So if it will create more risks and harms than the benefits, then it is irresponsible. Or you gene edited people in order to create superhuman army, in order to take over the world. I don't know what with these great potentials, we don't know what kind of intentions the people can have. Yes.
but the gender selection actually is like an India, for example, it's actually limit the birth of a particular gender and
Yes.
favor another one. Was there any
It has been discussed by the Islamic Academy in Mecca, and they didn't accept the gender selection. They didn't accept it. They said only for very exceptional situations, etc. But in general, not.
Is that related to Yahabun and Yasha'un?
Yes, that you have to accept. They said only possible if the disease is related to the gender. Some people, they have genetic diseases which hit only the males or hit only the females. So you try to take the males or the females, not because of the males and the females, but as a kind of treatment for the genetic disease, because this is the only way. But to choose the gender just because you want to choose, they found this problematic. And when it comes to the Muslim world, and I would say to the eastern part of the world, to a great extent, also the western part of the world, it's not gender selection, it's male selection. So we have to be clear about that. So there is clear discrimination in the situation. Yes.
related to this procreation after the Prophet predicted or prophesied that there will be sort of something like 80 females to one male.
Yeah.
Is there any study, for example?
What's this 80 females to what?
80 females to one male.
What?
The hadith that says at the end of the time.
By the end of the time.
Is there any way to explain this genetically, let's say?
Normally speaking, if we did gender selection, we can end up with this percentage.
Without touching the selection itself, or getting involved in selection, but natural.
Naturally, throughout history, the percentage is usually 49, 50, 51. It doesn't go beyond this. Even when you have wars where men are massively killed, etc., it fixes itself. But the hadith speaks about the end of the time. So maybe at this time, everyone is using gender selection as like cesarean delivery now that we do it almost on a daily basis. Maybe they were doing them. We don't know, or it may happen because of gender-related diseases that kills children with a specific gender. I don't know.
What about the embryo selection for IVF?
Yes.
Many other things, and it can be used to avoid certain diseases as well. So
They are inclined in their discussions to say that if the selection is for medical reason, it's possible. So to avoid children with specific genetic diseases, etc., that's fine. Any other things for color, height, I don't know what, they wouldn't permit this. So they would see it treatment. Treatment, yes. No treat goes outside treatment, whether you call it enhancement or not, then it not. This is the general criteria that I can see in the publications.
So what's the prediction for the future of this genetic field?
I think personally, the train left the station, so we cannot bring it back to the station. The question is how fast the train will be and which direction it will go. That's.
There'll be a lot more blonde and blue-eyed people.
We will see.
Related to, I mean, the difficulty of drawing ethical conclusions in a field where the science is not fully understood, because even with the genome, they're discovering most of the genome is actually not coding, and there's the epigenome, but
Yes.
there's chemical markers that affect the expression of genes. So there's so much beyond just the actual, DNA that affects the expression and
Yes.
environmental influences on the expression. So there's so many unknowns. So how do you continue drawing ethical conclusions when it's not fully understood?
Yes, but as I mentioned, I think today or yesterday, it's not necessary that you have all the information, especially if it is an urgent issue. You don't have to, but you must have enough information. That's the question. Now the problem is that we have what they call big data. We don't have the normal big data. So you have 3 billion letters. If you speak about the combinations between these letters, you will have trillions and trillions of possibilities. How can you manage all this? It's unimaginable. If it's me who was doing this genetics, I wouldn't start. Because I would say it's just impossible. How can I manage this? How can I know? But it seems these people are very challenging people. They go and they try to find a way. And now the supercomputers that have been invented to make these calculations and manage the big data is helping them trying to get this. But from an ethical perspective, we say you must have sufficient information to judge this. What is sufficient? We will always disagree because it depends on case by case, depending on a case by case. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we have to be satisfied and sometimes we
But this is not how science works. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is not how science works. Science always is to break what's established, to challenge the established facts, to go beyond what's normal, to cross the frontiers. This is science and this is technology. You must do new things all the time. This is good because this is how you can improve your life and advance, but it's also risky. Yes, but they will say it's not in tubda lakum tasukum. It's very good. Yes.
Now, if we look at the secular scientists, they are always curious to discover.
Of course, yes.
They are pursuing discovery all their life, and they may come up with things that are very helpful to not only the human being, but also to the environment.
Yes, but I think also when people made the discoveries that they made, let's say from the 20th century till now, not only I think so, but many people and historians think what happened from the beginning of the 20th century till now is not to be compared with what happened from the beginning of creation till the 20th century. So what we achieved in the 20th century is unimaginable. Not only, by the way, in biomedical sciences, but in arranging our life, in means of transport, etc. We have been to the moon, we sent machines to the Mars. It's unimaginable what we did. And still, we didn't die out. Humans are still living, they have life. We made so many species die out on Earth. There are some statistics about this, more than 90 or 100 or something species died out because of our way of intervening. And still, things are going. This is what the scientists say. Even if we sacrifice some species, we still can do it. So we will see.